This next speaker is somebody who has worked tirelessly to share what's happening in Colorado with all of us here in Arizona and also with other states across the United States. We are so grateful for the work he does and for his courage in standing up to share the real Colorado experience. And let me introduce him to you. His name is Sergeant Jim Gerhardt. He is Vice President of the Colorado Drug Investigators Association. He has 29 years of experience as a commissioned law enforcement officer in Colorado. He worked in the North Metro Task Force for 17 years, working and supervising undercover drug investigations throughout the northern Denver metro area. Sergeant Gerhardt is also the Vice President of the Colorado Drug Investigators Association and is a founding member of the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. So without further ado, let's give Sergeant Gerhardt our warm welcome.
All right, thanks Sheila, and thanks all of you. I'm going to start off today with a little apology. I got into get dressed this morning and I pulled my nice slacks. They're fresh from the dry cleaners, and there was a nice big chemical streak running right up the top of them. So I'm in denim today, and if that offends any of you, then I guess I'll understand if you go join the protesters out front while I'm talking. Hopefully that won't happen. Yeah. Let me tell you right now, I was hip deep in this fight in Colorado when legalization came in. After we had our experiences with legalization, I got drafted by several states last year. Nevada, I was out there several times, California several times, Massachusetts several times, and here in Arizona. And I will tell you, bar none, the effort that happened here in Arizona, there's a reason why you defeated that initiative. You guys did stuff here that no other state was doing, and that was really, there was a leadership component that was missing in every single state. The work that Sheila did, that Bill Montgomery did, that Marilee Fowler did, and so many others of you, and including your governor, Governor Ducey. I mean, this was not to be seen in any of the other states last year. Every other state approached the legalization initiative the way we did in Colorado, and that's why they got the exact same result we got in Colorado. So let's give these guys a hand for what they did last year. My only hope is somehow this can be a blueprint for other states, because this was the right message, the right messaging, and the right leadership here in Arizona to fight this off. So who am I? Well, according to the pro-marijuana groups, I'm the biggest liar on the planet. I'm a paid liar to come and give you guys all a bunch of false information. So first of all, let me tell you this. I don't take money to come speak at events. I don't take a dime for that. The only thing I've ever asked anybody to do is reimburse my travel expenses, which has always happened. Today, I'm a police sergeant in Colorado. I'm in the patrol division, and I have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off. So I'm on my days off right now, and I'm not here on behalf of my agency. I'm here on my own time to share this with you. I don't get paid, so whatever they want to say about me, they can say. But this is a way to try to delegitimize people that are speaking out against this issue. And I guess, take it maybe as a compliment that they think enough of my message that they worry and try to disparage me. And it's not just me. This is the commander, former commander of my task force, a really good friend of mine. They would do the same thing to him. They'd write all kinds of nasty stuff about him. I met this Sheriff Travis down in Texas when I was speaking at the Texas Sheriff's Association last year, and he actually lost an election because he was standing against medical marijuana, and the entire campaign against him was that he wants sick children to die, basically, because he doesn't believe in snake oil medicines to be given to people, which is really what that whole movement is. It's the exact same thing as 100 years ago when snake oil salesmen would go around and claim that these different elixirs would make you feel better or help. And anecdotally, people would say, sure, they'd spoon this stuff into their mouths, they'd give it to their kids. It contained high levels of cocaine and opiates and other things that would kill people sometimes, and that's why that industry was shut down. We have a resurgence of that industry, the patent medicine industry, the snake oil industry, and it's the medical marijuana business, because none of this stuff is FDA approved. It's not gone through FDA protocols. It's just strictly anecdotal information about it helps. And so, and then they twist it to where if you're against it, you don't have compassion, which I think it's actually the opposite. Those of us who are against it basically say, look, I want people to have the best medicines. I want these children to have the best stuff. We want it best as proven by our FDA processes, not by some guy in a basement creating something and then selling it out on the marketplace. But they really did a number on him. And then poor Kevin Sabet. This guy takes a beating everywhere. Everybody's, what a liar he is. And this is, you know, he's, all the things they say about poor Kevin. So it's certainly not just me. It's anybody that tends to speak out. And I guess here's what we experienced in Colorado, how we ended up in this particular mess. And I think this is something that we're missing, those of us on our side of this issue that want to prevent more of this drug legalization going on in the country. You know, we come to the table and we play their game. And the game that they present to us is kind of a simplistic, you know, medical marijuana, we want to help people, this kind of thing. So we sit down like we're playing checkers, like this is a simple game of checkers, and we're trying to navigate through it. They're playing a more sophisticated chess game on the other side of that table. And they're out matching us in what they say, how they do things, how they maneuver. They're just running over us because a chess player is going to beat a checkers player every day, every time. And that's what's happening to us. Where this is going, and this has been no secret of this movement, if you think you are, when you sit down and have a conversation about medical marijuana, you're not really having that conversation. That's what they want you to think you're having a conversation on. That's the checkers game you're playing. They're talking about the next step, really, which is setting the stage for recreational legalization. And recreational legalization isn't about recreational legalization of marijuana. It's about getting a foothold into a system where you can one day go to a store or a shop and have regulated heroin, regulated methamphetamine, regulated cocaine, whatever, available the same way that they're trying to do with marijuana right now. And the proof of this is all over the place. If you look at the Drug Policy Alliance, that's the group that has been advocating for marijuana legalization and drug legalization forever. If you look on their website, they never talk about the legalization of any one specific substance. It is the legalization of all of it. So where this has evolved now is conferences are starting to show up, like this one here. This is the second one I know of in California this year, the Psychedelic Science Conference. What they are doing is they're looking at medical marijuana as a blueprint for how you get other controlled substances accepted into the culture. What they're talking about here are things like MDMA, which is also known as ecstasy or Molly. And it's supposedly having, you know, benefits to people with PTSD. It's a Schedule I controlled substance, so that's something now that they're working on. Psilocybin is another one that they're working on in this conference. I have not seen a specific reference to LSD, but I know in the past LSD has been talked about, going back to the old Timothy Leary days of, you know, this is a good thing for the human brain supposedly. So this is what they're trying to do. It's interesting even that they call their group MAPS, which is Multidisciplinary Action, what is it? Oh, Association for Psychedelic. Thank you. I can't even read it off the screen there. But what it is that it is a map. They're taking a look at how they were able to convince the public that marijuana had medicinal value, and they want to do it the same way. Bring up people, veterans that have gone through some very severe post-traumatic situations. They want to bring in children that have certain problems, the epileptic and that type of thing. Anyone where they can create a wave of sympathy. And they get enough of these people to come out and say, well, this is the only thing that helped me. You know, dropping acid was the only thing that helped me. And they're trying to get the public to buy that. And it's going to be a much easier sell for maybe a lot of us, my generation. We're not even sold on medical marijuana, let alone anything else. But I look at my kids and I think, well, they're growing up in a world down in Colorado where they won't remember a time where there wasn't marijuana available in shops if things don't change. So by the time they're my age, how big of a leap is it for them to accept more and more of this? So that's where it's all headed. Again, it's a chess game they're playing. Don't be convinced that it's something else. So what's happened in Colorado? Well, I've lived there my entire life, and it has been really shocking how nobody thinks of this anymore. It used to be when I was a kid growing up, and you talk about Colorado, people would think about the mountains and the skiing and the world champion Denver Broncos. But now nobody thinks of that. Everybody thinks about, this. And it has changed the dynamic of Colorado significantly. It's changed in a lot of different ways, but politically is one of them. The more people that have migrated to Colorado to get involved in all of this certainly has changed even our political dynamic in Colorado, and it's, from my point of view, not been for the better. And everywhere you go, Colorado becomes the butt of every single joke. This whole movement on marijuana legalization is just out there all the time. Here's a video clip coming up. We may have to play around with the audio because I'm not too sure, but this is just an example of where everybody's getting in on this act.
The pistachio. Green, natural, and available without prescription in all 50 states. He's fine.
So if the volume were up a little more, you'd hear that in the background there's a John Denver song, Rocky Mountain High, playing as the thing is going on. I mean, it's terrible. Everywhere you go in Colorado, this kind of thing. There were, for a while, the Totino's pizza rolls had this ad, and I can't remember what the catchphrase was, but it was something about the munchies. And so like everybody's trying to cash in on this thing, and it's just absolutely destroyed Colorado's image. So those of you that are statistical junkies, I would invite you to go online to rmhidta.org, which is Rocky Mountain HIDTA. HIDTA is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program, which is part of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. But what these guys have been doing, because they're federally funded, they can't issue opinions, they can't give you information in any of their reports that leads you to a certain conclusion. So what they did is they pulled together reports. They publish one every single year, and the latest one should be coming out any day. And they're just pulling statistics together from anybody who can find them. Everybody's asking us all the time, well, what's the impact on this? What's the impact on that? It'd be like me coming here to Arizona and asking you guys, hey, how many homicides are related to marijuana in Arizona? How many drugged drivers in Arizona are there? How many kids in the schools are getting caught with marijuana in your schools? The data is kind of out there, but it's not really being collected in a way that's easy to report out. So they've done as good of a job as I think that anybody could of trying to get this information. Now, when they started publishing these reports, then news wasn't so good. It certainly didn't surprise me. Every statistic shows problems. But the people providing those statistics started to back away from giving these guys information. This includes some federal government data. It includes school district data. Nobody wants you to know the true story of what's happening in Colorado. They do not want that out. And sometimes it's not because of any global conspiratorial reason, I don't think anyway. Sometimes it's just for their own image. They feel like it makes their industry look bad or their school look bad or whatever. But there is an amazing attempt to suppress information out of Colorado. The governor's office won't release any state data that isn't vetted through his office. And I don't know what that vetting actually means or looks like, but I'm suspicious of how pure the information will be. But if you want to go online, these are for free. I'd suggest you look at them. It's got all kinds of stats and all kinds of charts and information in them that would take me all day to go through. So some of the things you're going to find in there are what did legalization do to our adult and youth use rates? What did it do to traffic fatalities? Sheila talked about both of those already. What about hospitalizations? You'll see incredible numbers of hospitalizations of marijuana that went through the roof. We averaged something like 3 emergency room trips a day based on some kind of a marijuana issue that's associated with that hospitalization. School suspensions and expulsions have been a huge problem. Talk to any of our school resource officers and they'll tell you that since legalization, this has just added fuel to the fire that they were already dealing with. Probation use. I don't know if you guys have faced this yet in Arizona. Maybe it's already in your law, but there was a big debate a few years ago about whether people on probation with a medical marijuana card should be allowed to use marijuana. And a lot of jurisdictions said no, some said yes. The legislature finally got involved and they said, yeah, they wrote a law and said, yep, if you're on probation and you have a medical marijuana card, you have to allow those probationers to use marijuana. Crazy stuff like that. They're even pushing the school districts to have these products available in the schools. Like if a student has certain marijuana infused products or whatever they claim they need for whatever reason, that the school nurse would have to then hold those and dispense them in direct violation of federal law. But they haven't gone so far as to mandate that yet in Colorado, but that's the kind of stuff that's coming. I don't know how much of that's hit you guys yet, because your medical marijuana legalization happened many years after ours did. But like Colorado, these problems don't come up overnight. This is a slow sort of burn on all these issues that come up, and it sounds like you guys are starting to experience some of those now. But you just see all kinds of statistics and data, and it's not HIDA's data, it's everybody else's data that they've simply compiled. Washington State has similarly released a report, and so if you get on the Northwest HIDA website, you can see what's happened there. Again, the statistics aren't good as far as what's going on.
Federal law still says the use and sale of marijuana is illegal. But Colorado and Washington State have legalized personal use of cannabis, and that is causing some chaos. In Washington State, the new law forbids smoking marijuana in public, but as Fox News' Dan Springer found out, the Seattle police may actually be encouraging pot use.
Hello, Seattle! Look around this 22nd annual Hemp Fest in Seattle and you get the impression marijuana has gone mainstream. More than 100,000 people attended, many smoking pot in the open, some even offering our cameraman a toke.
You want this?
It's the first Hemp Fest since recreational pot use was legalized in the state, and the event felt like a victory lap led by the city attorney, Pete Holmes.
We did it. You did it. Last November, we changed the world.
Even the Seattle police got into it, joking about the munchies as they passed out 1,000 bags of Doritos with stickers, an attempt to educate.
If we can do that in a way that's creative, that's funny, that's going to get people talking about marijuana, and that even broader conversation about drugs and alcohol and kids, what's allowed, what's not allowed, then we're doing our job.
Their job did not include enforcing the law. They didn't make any arrests or write a single ticket, even though using in public is still illegal, and no one under 21 is allowed to smoke it. We saw plenty, including this 19-year-old who was higher than the Space Needle.
When it comes to weed, it comes right out of the ground. You should be able to smoke it whenever you want.
But you can still be fired for smoking on the job and jailed for driving stoned.
Job-wise, it don't affect how I would do my job. Don't affect how I drive.
It clearly does affect brain cells.
It takes away knee pain, makes me think probably smoother. I'm definitely more fluent, let's say fluent. Is that a good word?
Fluent?
Fluent.
Like in
I feel like, not languages, fluid as in like I feel as in the day, everything feels like a smoother, you know?
Oh, fluid.
No, I said fluent. I did say fluent, yes.
Oh, okay.
As in like fluent you normally say is, I guess you can do it well.
10 years ago, Seattle voters largely decriminalized the drug, requiring that pot enforcement be the city's lowest priority. But now the cops have gone a step further, actually making friends at HempFest with free chips.
It shows that the cops, they are okay for it.
My buddy and I are going to send them back east to friends and family and let them see what the West Coast is doing for the marijuana.
All right, joining us now from Seattle, Dan Springer. What is the little message they had attached to the Doritos?
Well, here it is. I got the bag right here, Bill. It's a sticker that says, "We thought you might be hungry. We'll give you the do's and don'ts." And it says, you know, don't drive while high, don't sell to minors. But it says, do listen to the Dark Side of the Moon at a reasonable volume and do enjoy HempFest. They were passing out about 1,000 of these at the event this weekend.
So there you have it. How many of you work in prevention? Yeah, pretty amazing cutting-edge prevention, right? That's really going to be effective. You know, I think the obvious message there is that when you don't condemn something, you condone it. And they're all but saying, yeah, this is a good thing. This is the police in Seattle doing that. So we've seen this in Colorado too. We've seen even our law enforcement officials, our law enforcement associations splintering on how hard of a stance they're going to take on this. And I'll tell you, for everything we do like that, we've never done anything quite as crazy as this. But every time something like that happens, and I'll tell you a real one. I'll tell you a real one that happened. So the tax money starts coming in for pot sales. And the governor's office is deciding a couple years ago how they're going to divvy all this money up. And they're giving it to this group and that group, and there's all sorts of people now making this greedy grab for this cash. Now think about where this cash comes from. This is money that is being exchanged for marijuana out of a dispensary. This is blatantly, in my view, violating federal law. This is illegal distribution of marijuana. The funds that are then collected would be subject to asset forfeiture. These are illegal funds. Colorado, the state, takes a cut of those illegal funds as taxes. This is the rationalization that it's okay because it's taxes. Well, I have yet to see anybody from the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. say that, yeah, that is legal, that's legal for a state to benefit off of this money that anybody else in the country, if they were to engage in this, they'd lose their house, they'd lose their business, they'd lose their car, they'd lose all that money, all of it would be gone, but the state of Colorado gets to keep it. And the state of Colorado gets to then divvy it out to other groups, even prevention groups and treatment groups that would be appalled with this. They're all standing in line now for cash. Well, one of our law enforcement associations was upset because law enforcement wasn't cut in on this illegal money. So they called me and our association, the Colorado Drug Investigators, and they said, would you co-author a letter with us that we want to send to the governor to say, hey, law enforcement needs to be cut in. We have all this public safety impact. Marijuana should be paying for it. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. And here's why. Because you think the marijuana industry wouldn't love to have law enforcement be a beneficiary of some of this? Because overnight, we'll get used to this money. We'll get used to it. And then we'll never want this industry gone. We'll never want to fight it because we'll get dependent on it. It's the same issue with the people who regulate marijuana in Colorado. This Marijuana Enforcement Division I'm going to talk about in a minute. The way they are funded, 100% funded, is through tax revenue and licensing fees. So what's the incentive then to find a bad dispensary out there and shut them down? Because you're cutting off your own revenue source that keeps your very division going. This is just a terrible system we have, very corrupting. And so, you know, what's happened in Seattle, we've had similar analogous things happen in Colorado as well. So how did Colorado get to be somewhat at the epicenter of this mess? We certainly didn't start this medical marijuana movement. That all came out of California in 1996 with the first voter initiative there that allowed for that. Colorado didn't jump on that bandwagon until the year 2000. And when Colorado did it, we amended our state constitution to allow medical marijuana. So if you think about it, why you would have a state constitution, protecting the right to free speech, the right to religious expression, all the protections, keeping the government out of unreasonable searches and seizures. Pot is a right in Colorado right up there. It's in our constitution right along with everything else. And I don't think most voters knew that. I don't think they understood what they were doing. So medical marijuana comes in. We weren't the first state to do it. 10 years later, recreational marijuana comes in. We again amend our state constitution and allow now recreational marijuana as a state right in Colorado, constitutional right. But again, that wasn't even it, because by this time, Colorado had already been seen somewhat as the epicenter of this movement. That's why there was such a big push in 2012. But we didn't do it alone. Washington State jumped on that bandwagon as well. We were the two states that did it. Where Colorado ended up in the middle of this thing happened a couple of years earlier in 2010. When the medical marijuana proponents came to the legislature, they had been abusing a loophole in the law that was allowing these dispensaries to pop up. And the state had to decide either to shut these dispensaries down or to allow them to exist in some form or fashion. And that's where we turned a corner, was in 2010 when House Bill 1284 was on the floor. This allowed, for the first time in the country's history, a legal from the state perspective, it's illegal federally, but legal from the state perspective, a legal commercial industry that would be regulated by government, taxed by government, all that. That was where this all happened. And when the industry got a foothold in Colorado, that became the center of the universe for this entire movement. And we fought it like crazy. I'm sitting towards the front there in the chamber that would ultimately be jam-packed with people, and a hearing that started at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon that didn't end until almost 10 o'clock at night. The room was absolutely packed. The guy in the very back there, in the lower part of the screen, that's a guy named Mike Elliott, and he runs a group called the Marijuana Industry Group. That was the group that came in and convinced the legislators that, if the government would just get involved in this, we want regulation. We want to be legitimate. Come in and regulate us. We're okay with that. And his group was the one that started the whole process moving forward. We went in there, testified about all the problems. Interestingly enough, most of the marijuana proponents actually were opposed to the bill as well. There was almost nobody who spoke in favor of the bill except the marijuana industry group. The marijuana proponents said this was way too restrictive. This was going to just kill them because of over-regulating. Our side of it said you're legitimizing something and you're doing something that's in blatant violation of federal law. There's going to be all kinds of consequences for this. But the argument that underlied it all was that, well, my grandma's got glaucoma and she's got a doctor's recommendation for marijuana. So what's grandma going to do? Is she going to go to a clean, regulated store, regulated by the government, that's clean and safe? Or does grandma have to go to the back alley and deal with a drug cartel member from Juarez to get her medicine? And that's how they sold it and manipulated the legislature, who eventually went ahead and did this. We went in there, testified like crazy against it, but by this time, the governor's office had gotten in on board. This was Governor Ritter, our former governor, and he basically brought this guy here, Matt Cook, into the discussion and essentially said, you know, we need a regulatory scheme that's going to work. Can you figure it out? Matt worked for the state of Colorado, but he worked in the gaming area, so we have some limited stakes casinos in Colorado. Matt was in charge of the group that oversaw those casinos. So naturally, how do you regulate marijuana? Well, you regulate it like a casino, says Matt. So what he does is he says, well, we'll make sure that every place has cameras up that see everything that's going on, and you know, we'll barcode all the plants and we'll do all this stuff. And he threw all these bells and whistles out there, and it looked like, well, gee, that looks pretty darn regulated, so the legislature went with it. They created out of the Department of Revenue the Marijuana Enforcement Division, and this is the group that is funded and paid for by the industry, essentially. From my perspective, these are puppets of the industry. This is not a regulatory group. These are puppets of the industry, in my opinion. Oh, and Matt, by the way, he ended up leaving a year after these regulations went into effect. He actually retired from the state of Colorado and went to work as a consultant for the industry, just so you know. What Matt sold to the legislature and the public was a term, which was a very catchy, clever term. We're going to track marijuana, he says, from seed to sale. Create a tracking system. And they thought, wow, seed to sale, Matt, that's awesome. Cameras in the facilities, barcoding on the plants. We'll have shipping manifests, he says, so we'll know where the stuff's going on the road. We'll electronically track it. They thought, wow, that really sounds cool. After the couple years went on with this little fictitious regulatory scheme we have in Colorado, we as law enforcement, and interestingly enough, a lot of dispensary owners went to the legislature and complained that there wasn't a true regulatory process taking place. So I think the legislature, I don't know this as a fact, but coincidentally, they ordered an audit of the medical marijuana regulatory system. I think they were trying to shut us up and shut up the squeaky wheels within the industry, and it backfired on them because they released a two-part audit that showed that this regulatory system was an absolute failure, basically. They didn't quite say it that way, but they pointed out problem after problem after problem. These are available online if you want to go look them up. This was the regulatory scheme. Interestingly also, the state of Colorado has never commissioned another audit since this one. I think because they don't want people to know. They don't want this out there, how bad this is going. So let me give you a tour of a dispensary or a grow facility. So we have an officer from New Zealand who comes to Colorado and he says, hey, I want to see what this looks like and how this all works. So we take him down to Denver, find this facility here. You can see all the air conditioning units on the top. That is indicative because the power and the lights and everything produce so much heat that it takes a lot of cooling units to keep these places cooled down. So much so that they have to get special wiring and so forth with the power company to pull all the wattage of everything they're doing in this place. So the guy standing up there kind of to the left with glasses, he's the New Zealand officer. The guy in the blue is the owner of this facility. Super nice guy. Absolutely, and this is one of the things that's almost like a magician's trick on the law enforcement folks. We get so used to dealing with some of these shady people that are running stuff out of their basements, and then you deal with a guy like this who's clean, cooperative, and we get lulled into this false sense of security that this is a legitimate business guy. versus the drug dealers in a basement. There's really not a legal difference between the two federally, but we treat this guy a lot differently. Super nice guy though. Lets us come into his facility. We're signing in there in the front area, and we're also marveling at all of his paperwork showing how legitimate he is from the state of Colorado, you know. So we start taking a tour. One of the rooms that I don't have a photo of is just the room with the seedlings and the clones, the small plants. When the plants get up to a certain size, though, they go into a room like this, and this one facility had a lot of these rooms where they're basically simulating the summer season with the lighting, the spectrum of lighting they're hitting the plants with, gets them to grow. And I notice a barcode, one of the famous barcodes down at the bottom of a plant. And the blue ones were for retail marijuana plants. The yellow ones were for medical marijuana plants. So I start asking him questions for the benefit of our friend from New Zealand. And I said, sir, tell me, if you were to take the barcode off of this plant and swap it with the barcode on that plant, who would know? And he says, well, really no one would know, because this is the system we put together here. We barcode everything here. And I said, okay, well, do you have to declare how many plants you have then to the state in order to get the barcodes needed? I mean, do you have to say, well, I'm going to grow 1,000 plants this month, and they send you 1,000 barcodes? And he goes, no, we get the barcodes from a third-party distributor. I've got a whole closet full of them. And I said, well, how does the state know then what's the check and balance? And he goes, well, there isn't one. He goes, they don't come in and do audits like that. They walk in and they look around and they make sure that they see the barcodes, and they just kind of do a visual inspection. They're usually in and out in about 15 minutes. I said, all right. So we go into other rooms, and when the plants are large enough and they're beginning to flower, they move them into these rooms where they hit them with this red spectrum light, which simulates the way that the sunlight is in the fall, and it tells the plants it's time to bloom and do your thing. So this is where the plants will bud. And he had room after room, just row after row after row of these rooms where the plants were budding. Then what they do is they take them and they trim all the bud off of the plants, and they put them on these drying racks. And the drying racks all have numbers. So he says that the drying rack numbers then will correspond back to the barcodes somehow, what were on the plants. And so one of the people in the group asked him, they said, well, how do you know because you've got to remember what they're doing with these drying racks is getting the plants to the point where they can dry them and package them. When you dry a plant, you're going to have a heavier weight when the plant's wet, and it's going to be a lighter weight when the plant is dry. So somebody says to him, well, how do you know your employees don't come in and just kind of help themselves to fistfuls of stuff off these racks? And he laughs and goes, well, they probably do that all the time. We'd have no way to know that, because the weight's always going to be lighter when they come off the racks. So he takes them from the racks, and they take them into these other rooms, and by the different strains, there's all these different varieties of marijuana. These plants are all crossbred, and there are different strains of them. And they put them back in these different containers, and then start putting them into smaller quantities, packaging them for distribution, generate new barcodes, and put them on those packages. And then the Marijuana Enforcement Division provides the sticker of approval there with the red and green stamp on it, showing that it is regulated marijuana. There are indeed cameras in this guy's facility all over the place. And I asked him, you know, let's say you were doing the plant switching thing or the tag switching thing or something like that. Would you be worried at all somebody was seeing them on the cameras? And he laughs and he goes, well, not really, because, you know, if you look at his array of cameras, this is kind of what it looked like just from his perspective inside of his business. These cameras really, I mean, what are you going to see really? Now, the IP addresses of these cameras are provided to the Marijuana Enforcement Division, and this was another trick to the legislature and the public that, oh, not only will these cameras be everywhere, but we'll have the ability, not we as law enforcement, but they as regulators, they'll have the ability to monitor everything. Well, can you imagine? There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of licensed facilities with, you know, this guy had like 50 cameras in this one facility alone. Can you imagine the manpower that it would take to sit and stare at these screens all day long? And what would you even see on them? So this is all just fictitious. This is just window dressing. This one grow location, he said he had 45 cameras in it. He said it cost him $700,000 to set up, and the utilities run him $11,000 a month. And he's got 4 of these places. He's got four of these grow facilities and 4 dispensary outlets. So we go over to one of his dispensary outlets on Broadway. You go in and sign in, and then you can shop to your heart's delight with everything, edibles and all kinds of stuff on the shelf. There's really no shortage of inventory of anything. You can buy t-shirts and whatever you want. There's all kinds of stuff there. So he said he gets about 250 customers per day at that little shop of his. He says the average sale is $75, so you do the math over time, and that's about a $6 million a year business, which of course will have some overhead. It's going to have employees to pay for and all that other stuff, but that's his gross. So he's not doing too bad, and he's got 4 of those locations. So the sales job that is given to everybody, including the public, is that because there's so much money coming into this industry, that the government is also going to become rich, that your financial woes are going to go away through all this great tax money that's coming in. Well, year after year, the state of Colorado reports that about only 0.5% of the tax revenue into the state of Colorado is coming from this industry. And this is with hundreds of licensed facilities and multi-millions of dollars in each of these facilities. So putting that, this is what a pie chart of that looks like, in case you're wondering. This is what 0.5% looks like in a pie chart. All the blue is all the other revenue generated into the state of Colorado. The little red wedge there is the marijuana. And it's not significant. Our governor has not been as strong on this issue as I would certainly like him to be, but there are some statements he said that have been helpful, and he's talked about it multiple times. If you think you're going to get rich, you think your state's going to benefit tremendously, it's not correct. And that 0.5%, you have to also figure there's a cost to all these regulators. You gotta pay for their office space and their salaries and the benefits and all that. There's a ton of overhead in regulating pot. The people that are making money are the dispensary owners. They're the ones making money, not the government. So when recreational legalization came in, they pulled a lot of tactics, same thing they did here in Arizona. They try to make alcohol the great evil in the world. In fact, if there's any help the marijuana industry's done for us, is probably highlight some of the dangers to alcohol. Not that I think that's a good thing to have them saying it, but at least someone's saying it. So they have certainly talked about that, but they tried to present this as it was an option. Wouldn't you rather have your kid high than drunk? Wouldn't you rather have, as a police officer, wouldn't you rather go into a disturbance where everybody's high rather than when they're all drunk and fighting? This was the stuff they threw out there. If you look in the height of statistics, look at the alcohol sales in Colorado since legalization. They have almost doubled. Our consumption of alcohol, cocaine, and opioids is going through the roof since legalization. It's not coming down. So then some of those statistics, again, are in that report. But this is one of the ads they ran, and this one's got a really low volume, so you might have to hike this one a bit. This was one of the ads they ran on us on TV when they pushed this.
We all know where the money from non-medical marijuana sales is currently going. It doesn't need to be that way. If we pass Amendment 64, Colorado businesses would profit and tax revenues would pay for public services and the reconstruction of our schools. Let's vote for the good guys and against the bad guys. Let's have marijuana tax money go to our schools rather than criminals in Mexico. Vote for Colorado. Vote yes on Amendment 64.
So if you want to see how that worked out, Google marijuana tax money in schools, and you're going to see from last year a whole slew of reports about how there isn't enough money coming into the states to have made an impact really on the schools. The Denver Public School District, which has the largest number of dispensaries anywhere in the state, through their city sales tax, the schools get like $1 per student through city sales tax of marijuana. Through the state fund, at least as of last year, they had received $0. The money was going to rural schools, and it wasn't building new schools or paying for teachers. It was fixing a playground. It was maintaining a lawn. It was giving them a little bit of an upgrade, that type of thing. This is not a windfall. This is not going to be anything. You wouldn't know the difference if you didn't have this money. It's not that significant. But they promised a lot of things. Tax money was going to come raining in from heaven. Safer drivers. We'd have less DUIs, they said, because the theory was that they sold everybody was that instead of going to a bar and getting drunk and then having to drive home, people will now stay at their home and get high instead, and they'll be off the roads. We already heard that didn't work out. They said, well, there'll be less access for children because you'll have to show an ID and the dispensaries won't sell, as if that would be the only place a child would get pot, would be from the dispensary. They said it was going to stop the drug cartels, eliminate the black market, and thereby freeing up jails, and you folks in law enforcement are being given a gift, because now instead of wasting all that time on marijuana enforcement, you can go out and catch murders and robbers and rapists, which apparently you're avoiding doing, to go marijuana enforcement. It was absolutely insane, the kind of stuff they threw at us. So the Denver 16th Street Mall is a place downtown where there's a lot of nightlife and restaurants, and the convention center's nearby. A lot of hotels are there. It's a little touristy area for shopping and commerce. We have had, over the last couple of years, some really significant problems because, instead of it looking like this, they started opening up dispensaries on the mall, and now what we have is, we still have a lot of people down there, but we have had this influx of homeless that have come into Colorado that we have never, ever seen before. This all coincided with marijuana legalization. And when you talk to most of these guys, they'll tell you they came to Colorado because of the liberal drug attitudes that they perceive there. But even up in my area, I'm not even in the heart of downtown, I'm up in a suburb. And I just came back to patrol in January. I cannot believe the homeless encampments and the homeless complaints every single day, and the panhandling issues and the homeless on homeless crime. We had a homicide a few months ago where a homeless person beat to death another homeless person with a baseball bat. And there's other crimes associated. It's to the point where we don't know. We're trying to encourage our officers to do more field interview cards just to see who's in our community, so that when we have these homeless on homeless crimes, we might be able to figure out who's been in certain areas. It is a absolute huge problem that I never saw coming. The other thing I didn't realize was happening, because I was in the drug task force the last 8 years, was that we've also had, whether it's related directly or not, I don't know, but it's another thing that's coincided. The number of mental health calls for service we have right now, and the number of people threatening or committing a suicidal act, are through the roof. We are averaging more than one emergency mental health commitment a day, which in my community, that's unheard of. And I literally will go in, as I'm driving around in patrol every single day on my shift alone, waiting to find a day when we don't have a call about somebody threatening suicide or attempting suicide. It's literally almost an everyday occurrence for me. So this whole thing just coincided right with the legalization movement. So what happened? Well, we started having all these problems down on the mall. It required Denver Police Department to put more police officers on the mall. So where were these freed up resources coming from? Because now they're having to deal with all kinds of stuff out on the mall. For example, this was a person with a cell phone camera captured this last year. Sorry that it's a little bit jerky, but this guy, it's not a slow motion video. This computer just apparently is playing a little slow. But basically, he is just running around indiscriminately with this pole that he's got, and he just starts beating people on the mall. He just starts assaulting people all over the place. I'll at least get to one here. We'll be here all day, I guess, if I show this whole video. But you can see he just runs up to these people here and just starts assaulting them with this thing. Anybody from the 70s remember the $6 Million Man? We need a little bionic sound effect, I think, right here. And for those of you who don't know what that is, there, now it's playing a little better. But he just runs around and he's just assaulting people. He's like out of his mind, ranting about whatever, and just indiscriminately attacking people on the mall. That's probably enough of that. So what did the Denver mayor say about it? Well, he said, let's be clear, marijuana is drawing people to the mall. He added, this is one of the unintended consequences of legal marijuana. The mayor said the city will continue to increase police presence on the mall and to enforce current laws. Now, of course, the pro-marijuana people lost their minds when he said this, and how dare you, and all this. And after that, he kind of softened what he was saying, but he's 100% accurate. I don't have it in this video right here, but Channel 7 News went and interviewed this guy when he was in jail and kind of came down off of his whatever his deal was. He has a history of schizophrenia and other mental health problems, and he came to Colorado for marijuana use. That's what he said. Now, whether he was under the influence at that moment or not, I don't know. He could have been. He might not have been. I don't know. But that, at least you can see there's some, we believe, a connection there. Then a week later, we get, some guy walking out of a Chili's restaurant on the mall, and some dude for no reason comes up with a box cutter and stabs him. 5 arrested for assault in an unrelated case. There's a report from Visit Denver, which is they're sort of the marketing firm, I guess, for the city to bring conferences and conventions in. Look at the report they put out about a year ago. Read Visit Denver Marijuana, Google that, you'll see. There were people that had come to Colorado. They said they had taken conferences to New York and to other major cities, and Denver was by far the place they felt the least safe, and they said they'd never come back. All kinds of marijuana use on the mall, all kinds of problems. So Denver PD's had to crack down hard on this. So again, so much for freeing up resources. Now up in my jurisdiction, we get all kinds of little scams on pot dealing as well. Remember how the black market was supposed to go away? Well, the black market is thriving. Guys like this dude here is in this black SUV. He is marketing pot for sale. If you call him, and he'll come and deliver and make a deal with you somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. So we get him up to this grocery store. We have an undercover officer who makes a buy. We let him drive off. He pulls into this gas station. We arrest him, and we recover a bunch of marijuana. It's got dispensary labels on it, which is possibly where he got it, was he goes to the dispensary, buys it, and then resells it to people. You see the barcodes. And there's our buy money that we use, so we recover our cash. And then I spot a gun sitting behind the passenger seat of the car, so he had a gun available should he need it to pull it out and take care of some business. So while I'm taking this picture, somebody goes, well, hey, there's another gun back here, so I take that picture. And then somebody goes, well, there's a few more guns in the back if you want to take this picture. So here's the ice cream man of pot dealers driving through the neighborhoods of my city with, the Batmobile here selling pot to anybody. So when he's interviewed, here's what his little claim was. Now, he didn't lay this out to our undercover cop. He didn't know that an undercover cop, he didn't know who it was that actually got him busted. But here's what he says is he goes, well, you guys have it wrong. I'm not a pot dealer. I'm a pot consultant. So what people pay me for is to consult with me in my mobile consultation vehicle to answer questions about marijuana, anything people want to know. Then as a gift, at the end of my consultation, they are given a small amount of marijuana for free. Now in Colorado, two people who are over the age of 21 giving up to an ounce of marijuana to one another for free is legal and constitutionally protected. So had this guy laid this argument out a little differently, he might have been able to convince a jury that this was legit. We went to the legislature and said, well, we got to do something about this, because our opinion was this is a little bit like, a prostitution act where you go, well, I didn't pay her for sex, I just paid her phone bill after we had sex. That kind of thing. And they said, well, but the problem is, the argument's going to be, it's like a real estate transaction where you buy a house from your realtor and they give you a bottle of wine as a gift, and that's what the counter argument's going to be. So to this day, we have no solution for this particular problem. And then the backyard growers. So every single fall in our neighborhoods all over the state, we'll get these people growing pot, they've got medical cards or whatever, and they just do it out in their backyards, which is completely illegal. This is not allowed, but they do it anyhow. This particular grow, that's a middle school right behind it there that you can see. And it was actually the middle school that called to complain because they could smell the odors from this thing by the kids that were out on the playground there. This was another guy who had a structure on the back of his house, and inside had a garden of medical marijuana. This was one here, that's one of my detectives who's taken the picture, but it's on that other side of the fence there. And the way we found this one was some middle school kids were walking to school and they were just reaching up and grabbing fistfuls of pot off of this guy's plants. So here's what it looked like when you walked by them. Another medical marijuana grow. This is a grow in a backyard garden. You can see there's houses surrounding on all sides, a playground in the neighbor behind, some large marijuana plants growing out in the open. A middle school kid got into this, took it to school, got caught by the school resource officer, and when we backtracked it, this is what we found. It's another open grow out here in an apartment complex area. So that's another big issue, is the in-home growing, the outside growing, that's taken up a ton of time. Now in these backyard grow operations and even some of the indoor grows, we've had home invasions, we've had all kinds of stuff that's happened. A year ago, two teenagers jumped into a guy's backyard to get pot. He shot them both and ended up killing one of them, who was 14. And here's the guy right here. He finds out the hard way that he can't just shoot a kid at a pot grow. Organized crime. This has been the thing that has taken all of our time. People are coming into Colorado in large groups. Sometimes they're from the United States, sometimes they're from Cuba, sometimes they've been from Vietnam, they've been from all over the place. What they'll do is they come into Colorado and they start buying homes all over the place. And they'll have 200 plants in this home, and they'll have 200 plants in that home, and 200 plants in that home. And then they cultivate it all, and they end up selling it to out-of-state or out-of-country markets. This was a case we had with some Vietnamese folks that had come up from Houston, Texas. They were running all kinds of grow operations. We raided, I can't even remember how many houses, 30 houses or more. Took out all kinds of grow equipment out of them. You can just see the processing of all these places. There's one of our detectives standing in front of one little marijuana plant, which is 2 times as big as he is. There's me standing out in front of a whole bunch of pot that we got out of this particular seizure. So this kind of thing is pretty common. And what we've seen is these are people from all kinds of cases where, like in the lower 2 photos there, those are some Colombians that came in, and they got a marijuana dispensary license through a third party who was able to meet all the criteria, but they were the ones who funded everything, and were running this whole thing, growing pot essentially illegally, but with a legal license. The guy in the upper left corner there, he ran a skydiving service, I think out of Minnesota, but well, he ran it out of Colorado, but he had ties to Minnesota, and so he was using his skydiving planes to transport pot to Minnesota. I mean, everything you can think of. And trying to get this word out to the public has been a nightmare too. You know, if there's any suggestion that marijuana legalization has been good for Colorado in any way, the news media jumps on that in a heartbeat. You see that everywhere. When you try to explain to them, well, hey, there are tons of problems here, you get the reporters that get it, and they're trying to pitch these stories, but they say that their bosses are like, well, can we actually prove that this is this and this is that? So for whatever reason, they'll jump on the other side of the story, but it takes forever to get them. So an AP reporter I'd worked with named Sadie Gurman, I kept telling her about all this illegal distribution of all these groups, and she was getting all kinds of pushback, finally got this story out, and it was a good one, talking about these drug traffickers seeking safe haven amid legal marijuana in Colorado. But it's so rare to get that information out. So then in Colorado, what happens is that you point this out to the marijuana industry and the people that have been pushing this, and you said, hey, I thought you said all this was going to go away. And they'll say 2 things. Well, we didn't say it was going to go away overnight. We just said eventually it will go away. And then the second thing they'll say is, oh, well, I'll tell you what's driving the black market is the taxes. We tax marijuana so high that it's forcing people to grow it themselves, and then they're selling it cheaper than what the dispensaries can sell it for. Well, it's not true. It's just simply not true. If you take a look at an ounce of tobacco, you go into a store here in Arizona, you buy one of those little round tins of tobacco for it, that's an ounce of tobacco. That'll cost you maybe $3 to $5. If you buy that same amount of pot in a dispensary in Colorado with no taxes, that is going to be on the cheap end $150. It'll go up to $300. So a product that on one product you can sell it for $3, the other product you sell it for $300, that's with no taxes. And actually on the tobacco side, that is with taxes. So that's not what's driving it. You can add the taxation of pot onto that, and that ounce of pot that would sell for $150, I think I estimated on the low end, you add the 30% on top of it, that's the difference right there with the taxation. The problem is the base cost of marijuana is super expensive. And why is that? Well, when you look at the number of Americans that use illicit drugs to include marijuana versus the number of Americans that use tobacco or alcohol products, you can see why those products can be sold dirt cheap, because the user base is so huge. Imagine that we had the same rates of alcohol use as marijuana use. Let's say that our chart here, instead of all those little red bodies, which indicate 1 million, everybody indicates 1 million people, the long blue line there that you see on the left chart, that's the number of marijuana users estimated in the country. It's about 19 million. Imagine you could get the alcohol and tobacco numbers down to 19 million. Not only would you say that's the biggest public health success we've had in substances ever in this country, but I would speculate that a 6-pack of beer might then cost about $80 or $90 because you don't have enough people buying it to make a profit at the lower price. So this is the trade-off here. In order to run the black market out of town, in order to get marijuana down to the price point of, say, tobacco, I believe what would have to happen is every single state in this, you have to have everything you have with tobacco and alcohol with pot. Every state has to have it legal. The federal government has to have some oversight. Every single state has to have oversight, and you've got to get the number of users up much, much higher. You've got to quadruple or better the number of pot users in this country to get the price point down, and I don't know that that's what we want, is more pot users in order to eliminate the black market issue. So it's a tough issue, and if you have more users out there, you're going to have more problems with impairment. Everything focuses all the time around these dispensaries. People think that legalization and the dispensaries are one and the same, and that's not true. Legalization has to do with personal conduct, personal growing, personal use, all that. Commercialization, which is a part of legalization, that's what the dispensaries are. That's commercialized marijuana. When you have commercialized marijuana, you're going to have some certain problems. And one of the biggest ones is that they're going to make a ton of money, and they're going to be able to influence your political system. They're going to be able to influence your public messaging. They're going to have a lot of influence with that money, which is what's happening. But the problem is with impairment. When this stuff gets out in the community, all the problems you currently have with marijuana, just imagine it getting worse because you have more and more people using. So we have a ton of people that are driving under the influence of drugs. I don't know if you've experienced this yet here in Arizona. We didn't see this until the last couple of years, where even trying to get a conviction on a drugged driving for marijuana is becoming increasingly difficult because of the medical marijuana argument. I cannot tell you how many drunk drivers I've arrested that were absolutely certain they were fine. They had no problem driving. They're doing, 5 miles an hour in the middle of the highway, oblivious to what's going on, but they were absolutely fine. Anything that impairs somebody, the whole thing, drug use is always built on kind of a house of cards of rationalizations at the end of the day. It's rationalizing why this is okay, why it's not that bad. And the more you use, the more addicted you are, the higher the rationalizations are, unless those of you in treatment see it differently. It seems to me like people that are very addicted, and especially those that are not willing to admit it, tend to just be the more highly rationalizers of what they're doing. And that's all that it is, and it confuses jurors, obviously. This is a kid named Josh Wittig who was smoking pot with his buddies one night. He had gotten he's an 18-year-old kid at this time, who got a medical marijuana card because he had a back problem from an injury a year earlier. So he goes to a doctor in Boulder, in and out in about 5 minutes, gets a recommendation, goes straight down to a dispensary in Denver, buys a bunch of pot. He and his buddies are smoking it. They're playing Xbox. About midnight, he decides to go home. So he's driving down the road. He drifts across the traffic into the oncoming lanes of traffic, where he meets at the crest of a hill a motorcyclist coming the other direction. That's the vehicle he's driving, and the motorcyclist hit this thing head on. They're each doing about 50 miles an hour, so from that motorcyclist's point of view, that would be like him driving 100 miles an hour into a brick wall. Immediately, head trauma, internal injuries, and he died on the spot. The traffic division called us the next day because of the medical marijuana issue and asked us if we wanted to go up and talk to him. The only purpose we had to go up there was we were trying to find out how did he get his card, what was the dispensary, but he just kept talking and talking and talking and gave us statements like this.
What we were doing, we were chilling real hard, just like chilling, smoke bowl, all right, load a bowl, and then like by the end of the night, we were just chilling, playing some skate on Xbox, and then I was like, fuck this, I'm tired. So I ended up going home, and I don't remember anything after that. I remember going over the railroad tracks on Thornton Parkway, if you guys know where I'm talking about, and a fucking crotch rocket. It just, I don't even know. He was on my side of the road. How the fuck am I in here? Yeah, because they had me on a $10,000 bond just because the guy died. It wasn't my fault. I went over to him, I started shaking him, and I was like, dude, please don't be dead on me. Please don't be dead. Because, my road was in my lane, Right. It was in the middle lane. That guy his bike was, God knows, I don't even know where. I didn't even know if it was a bike that hit me. And he's just laying on the floor, blood coming out through the sewage. And
45 minutes of that we had with him. Thankfully, he was still under his Miranda advisal from the traffic unit, so this ended up being admissible in court, and the judge lost his mind, the jury lost their mind. He ended up being convicted of vehicular homicide, so 2 lives essentially lost, his and the person he killed. Then the edibles started coming in, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of this here in Arizona. These infused products, very, very high amounts of THC in them, very concentrated. A New York Times columnist, Maureen Dowd, came to Colorado. She tried some of this stuff. She made the classic mistake a lot of people do, where they eat a little bit of it and they're not feeling the effect right away, so they keep eating and eating, and eventually it hits you like an atom bomb. And she describes all the impact she had on that, how she was laying on the floor all night, freaked out about what was going on. In other instances, it has resulted in some tragedy. A lot of kids get involved in this stuff and they end up hospitalized for days over ingesting these products. And then these 2 people here, this happened a couple years ago, but they were right back to back. The kid on the left is a 19-year-old student from Wyoming who came to Colorado and on spring break, and somebody got a hold of a cookie that was infused with edibles. He ate the cookie and then for some reason ran around the room in some sort of a crazed, delusional state, and then flung himself off the balcony of the hotel, and he plummeted to his death. While that was still fresh in everybody's mind, the woman to the right there, her husband was consuming like gummy bear type edible things or some kind of an edible candy product. He started ranting about the end of the world coming. He grabbed a gun. She was on the phone with Denver police screaming for help when he pulled the trigger and murdered her in front of their children. He was just recently convicted, but his defense was not guilty by reason of insanity because of what these marijuana edibles did to him. The court didn't buy that as a logical reason. However, they didn't discount the fact that he might have had a bad mental episode because of it. Luke Goodman he was a 24-year-old who came to Colorado from Oklahoma. He was on a ski trip with his buddies. He bought a bunch of these peach tart edibles, ate them. The friend said he suddenly acted like he was almost insane, went down to the car that he came in. He always traveled with a weapon. He put the gun to his temple and killed himself. Family said he'd had no history of mental health, no problems. Nobody quite knew what happened there. These 2 guys also from Oklahoma come to Colorado because they're gonna participate in what one of our district attorneys calls narco-tourism in Colorado. And what narco-tourism is that you drive into Colorado and you make a deal on Craigslist or some other way with a person who's gonna sell you pot, but instead they rob you when you show up. They take all your money and they leave you with nothing. That happens very frequently. But to these 2 guys, it got even worse because they were murdered, and their bodies were put back in the van they drove to Colorado in, driven out to rural Weld County and set on fire. That's where their bodies were ultimately located. This is a case of a Brighton High School student this is in our task force jurisdiction area, who had a particular episode that went bad. There's actually a story about a couple of kids, but I'll tell you the story about Daniel Juarez after the video's done.
He was a great kid. Everybody loved him.
Daniel Juarez was an 18-year-old soccer standout, making Brighton High School's varsity as a freshman. But in 2012, Daniel smoked pot with a friend and went crazy, stabbing himself 20 times. He died within minutes.
If he wouldn't have smoked that marijuana that night, he would still be here.
Law enforcement and medical accounts obtained by CBS 4 support Erica Juarez's conclusion about her brother. While smoking pot that night, Daniel Juarez told a friend he was too high. "I just had an epiphany," said Juarez. Then he lost it. An autopsy showed 38 nanograms of THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, in his body. That's 8 times the legal limit for pot impairment. No other substances were detected. The coroner wrote that marijuana intoxication led to his suicide.
So if you're gonna sit there and tell me that if you smoke too much and you get too high, you're gonna fall asleep on the couch, then yeah, I'm definitely gonna tell you you're wrong. Because that's not the case.
But there are clearly people that will ingest a marijuana product and behave psychotically.
Chris Caldwell is chief of emergency medicine at Denver Health. More and more, he sees patients who've ingested marijuana, then make bad decisions. Do you see them coming in and suicidal in any way?
So yes, you do see that.
And every week, people who've ingested marijuana are out of control.
That we have to restrain to ensure the fact that they aren't either a danger to themselves or other people.
8 years ago.
Then there's
my
Ann
son
Clark in
Brant
Boulder.
was
Her 17-year-old son Brant killed himself in 2007.
3 weeks before his suicide, my son smoked a lot of marijuana with friends, and he experienced a sudden, major psychotic break.
When he took his life 3 weeks later, he left this note. "I'm sorry for what I've done. I wasn't thinking the night I smoked myself out."
So Daniel Juarez, when this incident happened, you know, I was even shocked by this one because I had never heard of something like this happening. This was before the guy threw himself off the balcony and before the woman was murdered. And I knew marijuana is not necessarily a good thing, and I knew that there was a connection between mental health issues and marijuana use, but I literally called Dr. Christian Thurstone, who works in Denver. He's a pediatric psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and I asked him, I said, Chris, could this really happen? Like some kid goes and smokes pot and he loses his mind and stabs himself to death? And without even hesitating, Chris said, yeah, absolutely, that's consistent. So when the autopsy report came back, he had stabbed himself 20 times. The fatal wound went through his heart. The coroner came to a conference we held in Denver a few years ago, and she actually showed the crime scene photos and explained the situation. That's where mom found him, was in the kitchen laying on the floor dead. So the thought initially was, well, was the marijuana laced with something? So we took it, had it analyzed, what was left over from what they'd been smoking, and there was nothing. You heard in the news report, the blood work came back, and the only substance in his system was THC. So we did a search warrant on the house where these two kids bought it. They bought it from a medical marijuana patient who had gone to a dispensary, purchased it, and then sold it to these two kids. And then they went and smoked it, and it was just smoking it that caused that reaction for Daniel. So we seized what he had. It wasn't laced with anything. It just came straight out of the dispensary. So this is the kind of thing where, you know, we hadn't really connected these dots, and this is why I say coming back to patrol now and having an almost daily suicidal person call and an attempt suicide call almost every single day on my shift alone does not necessarily surprise me. And people are not connecting these dots. In fact, there may be some linkage to the opioid issue. I don't know if opioids create this syndrome with people as well, but that's what's being blamed on, is that we have this huge opioid problem. Of course, the billboards in Colorado tell us that we don't have an opioid problem because we have legal pot, but everybody else we're seeing dying because of this opioid epidemic, and people are saying that maybe that's having something to do with it. I don't know. All I do know is that it makes sense with the rise of this marijuana issue that we've had this rise of mental health problems. This is John Hines. This is the motorcyclist who was killed by Josh Wittig and the daughter he left behind. This case right here got some news attention, but the pro-marijuana people pushed back and said, oh, you guys are making a big deal out of the fact he was high. This wasn't about pot, even though his blood work was so much higher than our legal limits in Colorado. He had some trace amounts of prescription medicines because he was also taking those for his back injury. So they said, well, that's what it was. And then when John Hines, who was dead, when his blood work was tested, Mr. Hines had come from a bar and he was over the legal limit for alcohol impairment. Although there was no indication he was on the wrong side of the road or doing anything incorrect, that's where the other side diverted it. They said, well, he had prescription meds on board and the guy he killed was drunk, so it wasn't pot. Pot's not the responsible party for this. We also had a case where a teenager named Chad Britton was getting into his car during, it was either lunch or the end of the day at Broomfield High School, and there was another kid who was driving down the street and he was using the concentrated wax products they call dabs, and it's a very heavily concentrated form of THC, and he's smoking dabs while he's driving and he's super high, and he runs Chad over and kills him. This happened just before Thanksgiving that year. Aurelius Cisneros, this goes back a few years under when our medical marijuana was the only form of legalization we had. But Aurelia's dad is a marijuana dealer. You see him on the lower right. He had a pound or two of marijuana in his home. Some thugs came in, kicked in his door, tried to rob him. Gunfire started, and Aurelia, who was 10 at the time, was killed in the gunfire. Travis Mason last year, he's a former Marine officer who came out of the Marine Corps. He wanted to get hired on with the Denver Police Department. He took a job at a medical marijuana dispensary as a security guard, or maybe it was a recreational marijuana dispensary, whatever, a dispensary. The dispensary gets robbed. He was murdered, shot, and killed at the dispensary. There was a point during the medical marijuana years, as it was exploding on us, that the Denver District Attorney, Mitch Morrissey, kept telling people that he was getting case after case after case of murders and robberies and other violent crimes associated with medical marijuana. The proponents called him a liar, told him he was making it up, none of these things ever happened. So he put a video out on YouTube, which I think is still there, called The Deadly Impact of Medical Marijuana in Colorado. It's several years old now, but it highlighted all of these people who were caregivers or patients or in some form or fashion got involved in the middle of a bad marijuana dealing and were murdered. This, I could stand here and go on and on. I could tell you about the little girl in Fort Collins that was run over and killed on her bicycle while she was trying to cross the street and a stone driver ran her over. Or the guys who had come up from I think they're from the University of Arizona. They had come up, or they were from Arizona, I believe anyway, and they came up to Durango, because maybe they were going to school in Colorado. I can't remember that, but I think they were connected to Arizona. And anyway, they had a grow in their basement, and some suspects kicked in the door, murdered them, and I mean, I could go on and on. This just goes on and on forever. The district attorney in Arapahoe County, his name is George Brockler. He's actually running for governor in our state. But about a year or two ago, he made a statement to the news media where he talked about how over half of the murders that his office was dealing with were marijuana related. There's another prosecutor this year from another jurisdiction who's saying the same thing. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. The proponents won't admit to any of this. They won't talk about any of this. There's a deputy chief from the Westminster Police Department that's trying to compile a report to show the linkage between violent crimes and marijuana legalization. And he's getting pushback from some police agencies that don't want to give up their data. There is just this strange active desire to suppress information from the public. So with that cheery last thought, I'm open to answer questions for you all. I tried to save some time here to answer anything that I might not have covered in this presentation. I think at the end of the day, when you really examine the arguments for and against marijuana legalization, what we have to do on our side is always frame everything as what's in the best interest of public safety and public health. When we veer off of that, we're going to lose because they're going to twist us around every which way with their arguments. I think I saw a hand. Yes, sir.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the work you've done. It was extremely helpful for us in Yavapai County getting the message out. Two comments. One is, on the ATF firearms transaction record, the federal government now has changed the information on question number 11E, because that question, when you go to purchase a firearm anywhere in the United States, you have to fill out that transaction record. It says, are you addicted to or do you use marijuana? There's a yes or no check. They've now put in, as of last November, highlighted that basically it's still illegal federally. So if you have lied on that form, you've committed a felony. Nobody ever talks about that, and we're in the most gun-friendly state in the United States. Nobody ever talks about that. How do we get that message out? Number one. Number two, for Sheila, we have the first Red Rock Hemp Fest in the village of Oak Creek this Saturday at something called the Collective. I took time to go over to the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office to make sure they knew. You read what it says is there's going to be business being transacted. It's still illegal. We got it. You know, I would recommend everybody in this audience keep your eyes open because it's happening in your towns. We may have defeated it last year, but it's still happening. Thank you.
Great points. And I don't really have a great answer for either of them. The firearms issue, to me, that is just a piece of an even more blatant issue, which is, again, how do these dispensaries operate? How in the world, if a private person out of their home sells marijuana, they get raided, they get arrested, they get charged, and all their assets get taken from them. But the store owner, nothing happens to that person. And it's the exact same federal law. I don't know of any exemption that allows for it under federal law. So I think that until, I don't know if it's because there's not enough public outcry. I don't know what it is. You all right here on the front line of one of the big debates in this country on border security. Listen to, and I think it's an important discussion to have, and I'm not taking a side on it in this presentation. I have an opinion, but I'm not trying to get there. I just simply want to point out that when you listen to the one side of the issue, which is the administration side of it, all the reasons they lay out for why we need border security and why certain cities and states should not ignore federal law, well, apply that entire argument to marijuana. It's an even bigger, more blatant violation of federal law. The government's participating. The government's financially benefiting. How in the world is that not being addressed? So hopefully it will. Oh, these are. Does Colorado track pounds of marijuana? Thank you. Produced, yes, in the dispensaries they do, whoever asked the question. I don't know where that information is available, but the Marijuana Enforcement Division, as part of the state Department of Revenue, they do produce a report, and that should be contained in there.
So the follow-up on the bottom of that is, you track production versus consumption. I'm sorry, to be using the mic. The production versus consumption.
Hello.
I'm thinking in the state of Arizona. Thank you. I'm thinking in the state of Arizona. I just learned of a 50-acre growing site, 40-acre growing site up in the northeast. My county has got. They've said they can go ahead with 10-acre plots. I'm sensing, but I can't prove it. I'm sensing the production is far outstripping what is consumed, and then that begs the question: where is it all going?
It's a great question, and you know, when you add the black market component in on top of it, it makes it even more of a moving target. Keep in mind, though, this is one of the flaws in our regulatory plan. When they very first proposed this, and Matt Cook came to our drug investigators conference to speak about it, and he tried to sell us on that he had this great system for regulating marijuana. And my question to him at the time was, well, Matt, how will you be able to track inventory and production? For example, if you have a person who has a licensed grow facility and they say, well, this month I grew 200 pounds of pot, how do you know they didn't grow 400 pounds and divert 200 of it into the black market? Or how do you know, and this actually happens more often than you'd even know, how do you know that the dispensary owner isn't buying 200 pounds of it from the black market and then claiming that they grew it and then putting it out on the shelf? That's the one that happens more often. And Matt said, this was his exact quote, "Oh, we're going to know because the grower is going to have to certify what they're growing and how much they're producing." And that's what it boils down to. Because if you think about it, how else would you do it? If you didn't have independent auditors in, like state employees that you could trust in every single grow facility all the time when they're operating to verify what's going on, you'd never know. You have to rely on the industry itself to report accurately. The peach edible that Luke ate had an 89 THC level. Are most of these cases where people have episodes tied to HT content? I don't know the answer to that. I know that that has been associated with a lot of them, but in the case of Daniel Juarez, that was plant marijuana he was smoking. I don't know what the THC concentration was, but you're not going to get nearly what you're going to get out of these edibles. So we've had problems with both, but I do think the majority of things that have come to our attention have been with the high potency edibles. When highway patrol officers report on DUI drug traffic arrests in Arizona and in other states, could they please mention when the drug is marijuana? That's an excellent question, and I think it would be nice if they did break out that data. I don't know if there's a requirement for anybody to do that, but we've been trying. It's a really hard thing to get accurate information, because even in Colorado, a lot of jurisdictions simply report DUI drugs as just drugs. Even schools do it. Schools will have suspension data and expulsion data that goes through the roof after legalization about drugs, but they don't specify, is it marijuana or is it anything else? Anecdotally, they'll all say, well, it's pretty much all marijuana related, but trying to get that pure data, they haven't done. Yes.
And to that point, we always hear here in Arizona, the proponents always saying that we're incarcerating too many people for possession of marijuana. By the time they get to the prison system, they've had 3-4 bites at the apple. So out of the little over 42,000 inmates we have in state prison, only 240 of them are for possession of marijuana, and that's because they've had 3-4 bites at the apple. So that's a tremendous disparity in the numbers when they say we're incarcerating thousands of people for possession. So.
Okay. So I have just, it's a tangential question.
Sure.
We were excoriated this last year for, as the legislature, for having questions about texting. Do y'all have a texting bill or a texting statute in Colorado? I know it sounds tangential,
Driving while
but
texting, you mean?
Yeah, the hypocrisy here is just thick, and I'm wondering if you might, if you have one of those, and if you do, I'd like to know about it.
We do, and if you can give me your card, sir, I'll send you the legislation because it just was enacted a year or two ago. But it's about distracted driving. It doesn't zero in specifically on texting, but it's about distracted driving, which is essentially talking about texting.
So they have that, but
yeah. It took years and years for us to get a limit, similar to like on DUI, the 0.8 standard that's pretty much across the country. Anything above that, we just deem people to be having too much alcohol on board. With marijuana, we fought for years to get to a 2 nanogram limit of whatever the milliliter of blood is. And it took us forever to get anything through. Eventually, they did a 5 nanogram limit, but they didn't do it as a per se, they did it as a permissive inference. So the jury is permitted to infer that a person might have too much on board, and that's one of the reasons why we're losing cases.
How is that tested to the driver when they get pulled over? Is there a swab kit?
No, the only test that can be done if we suspect any controlled substance is a blood test. We just tell them basically, even if we smell alcohol on board, they're not eligible to take the breath test. It's going to have to be a blood test. Question, this is a good one. Is Colorado seeing more 2 or 3 stage grow operations in either the illegal grows or the commercial regulated grow ops? That's part 1 of this, and we're seeing 3 stage grows almost all the time. And the way that works, for those of you who don't understand, it'll start off with the seedlings or the clones, that's stage 1. And for about a month, they'll let the plants get mature enough to put them into stage 2, which are it's the vegetative plants with the white light that I was showing earlier. They let the plants get nice and big. Then they put them in stage 3 for a month or so, which is where they hit them with the red spectrum light. The plants will bloom, and then they can manicure them. So typically, one grow cycle is about 3 months, but there's always plants in each of the stages, so it's a constant thing. Every month they can manicure plants. We see that in people's basements. We see that in the industry. Part 2 of it is, can you explain the environmental impact of the grow ops in your communities? Well, this is a big one, and no one wants to address this. So the only type of structure that you can really grow this level of plants inside is a greenhouse. But these are being done in warehouses, and they're being done in people's basements and things like that. So you've got a lot of surfaces, porous type surfaces, things like that aren't easily cleaned, and you're introducing chemicals in there, and the biggest impact is the molds. We did a study with National Jewish Health, and I don't have the citation up here, but it's a published study where we brought them into 30 different grow operations and had them assess it for chemical issues and molds and other things. And the mold issue is the big one, especially when we would tear a grow operation down, we'd rip it apart. The molds got so high in those sites that it overloaded their ability to measure the top end of it. They would collect over 200,000 spores in a cubic meter of air, and it overloaded their meters. They're like, we've never, ever seen molds like this before. And that's the exact same thing that happens in a grow facility when they go to manicure the plants. They cut them down, they interact with them, they stir them up. And sometimes we all think of mold as like what you can see, like the black molds on the walls and things like that. These are microscopic mold spores that are in the air, and these are some fairly aggressive strains of mold. Penicillium was the one we saw most of the time, and that's one that'll rip your lung tissue apart, apparently, if you're exposed for long periods of time. And that doesn't go away just because you take the plants out. That stuff is now in that environment. A little bit of change in the barometric pressure will get that stuff launched into the air. So buying a resale house in Colorado, buying some of these, moving a new business into where one of these old businesses had been, that can be a pretty scary thing. But nobody wants to touch the mold issue because right now, every one of us is being exposed to molds. There's molds in the air currently. If we were in Hawaii, there'd be a lot higher mold levels in the natural environment than there are here in Arizona, where it's a drier climate. And nobody wants to really get in the middle of, well, how much mold is too much mold? And so It's a huge, huge issue. Oh, another thing for law enforcement. So these places will get burglarized in the middle of the night, these grow facilities will. And a couple of times what's happened is Denver PD has gone in, they've got an open door, they go in to clear a building, it's 2 in the morning. Well, that's when the dispensary decided to hit all the plants with all their pesticides and everything else. And it's put cops and firefighters in the hospital in Denver for that. So 1,000 problems with that. Would there be a black market if it was legal in all states? Okay, here's my crystal ball. I would say yes, until the price point of marijuana can come down to where tobacco is. We could legalize it in every single state. I just want you to think about it. And if you go to a shop and you buy an ounce of pot for $150 to $300, but in your basement you can grow huge plants with multiple ounces of pot and you can sell it for $75, $80, you're going to be able to flood the internal market because it's going to be cheaper than going to a dispensary. So I think that's what we're seeing in Colorado, and I think until you'd have to legalize it everywhere and you have to get the users, you have to get as many users up to the point where they could drop that price down. And that's a huge public health price to pay to get rid of the black market. When highway patrol officers report on DUI, oh, I got that one already, sorry. Has Colorado seen an increase in fire and explosion from people making concentrates with butane? How are police in Colorado dealing with this? We had a spike of this problem for a while. People running butane hash oil labs out of their homes. Especially in the wintertime, when people would close the houses up. You guys may not know what winter is. Let me tell you what winter is. It's really freaking cold. And so you close your house up really tight and the fumes will accumulate to the point where it doesn't take much to ignite them. And we were having a lot of problems with that. The legislature passed a bill making it illegal to do any of that extraction with any kind of flammable solvent. And between that and the public information that's been out there seems to have quashed that problem. And the entrepreneurs in Colorado have developed these closed systems that they market and sell where people do this and it contains the fumes of whatever they're doing a little bit better. So we still get them occasionally, but for a while there we were getting a lot of them. Good.
Well,
thank you all.
Let's give Sergeant Gerhardt